The recent Indo-Pakistani conflict, ostensibly triggered by a terrorist attack in Pahalgam, Kashmir, has unveiled a calculated strategic gambit, a multifaceted endeavor to test advanced military capabilities, deploy cyber warfare, and bolster the domestic political stature of India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Pakistan's Chief of Army Staff General Syed Asim Munir. Regional analysts speculate that the Pahalgam attack may have been a false flag operation orchestrated to justify India's military escalation, a tactic purportedly recurrent in Modi's political strategy to galvanize nationalist sentiment. India's substantial losses, most notably its Russian-supplied S-400 air defense system and Rafale fighter jets, in contrast to Pakistan's resilient Chinese-supplied J-10C fighters, have reshaped the regional strategic balance, conferring a geopolitical advantage to China. In Pakistan, the conflict has illuminated profound public disillusionment with the ruling coalition and systemic governance failures, fueling an ardent demand for transformative political reform. This orchestrated conflict raises a pivotal question. Will India's reflexive military actions against Pakistan, often predicated on manufactured pretexts, become an entrenched norm, perpetuating a cycle of violence? The convergence of military ambition, political expediency, and domestic unrest portends a volatile trajectory for South Asia and the global community. The conflict served as a testing ground for both nations' military arsenals. Pakistan deployed Turkish-manufactured Bayraktar TB2 and Akinci drones, successfully tested a 450 km range ballistic missile, and leveraged its Chinese-supplied J-10C fighter jets, which demonstrated agility and advanced avionics in countering Indian air operations. India responded with Israeli Heron Mark II drones, long-range precision-guided missiles, and its Rafale jets, valued for their multi-role capabilities. However, Pakistan's precision strikes destroyed several Rafale jets, severely undermining India's air superiority, while Pakistan's J-10C fleet remained operational, highlighting a critical disparity in outcomes. Both nations engaged in sophisticated cyber operations, with India targeting Pakistani military networks and Pakistan disrupting Indian power grids and financial systems. State-sponsored disinformation campaigns amplified nationalist fervor, disseminating narratives of triumph to bolster domestic support. The Pahalgam attack, officially attributed to Pakistan-based militants, has elicited skepticism. Analysts posit that it may have been a false flag operation designed to provide India a pretext for military action, consistent with Modi's historical approach, as evidenced by the 2019 Pulwama attack, which precipitated the Balakot airstrikes. By casting Pakistan as the aggressor, Modi mobilizes India's hyper-nationalist electorate, deflecting domestic scrutiny and consolidating political authority. His aggressive airstrikes into Pakistan's Punjab, coupled with the unprecedented suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty, were strategically calibrated to project resolve ahead of critical elections. His rare English-language declaration to punish terrorists beyond imagination was a deliberate exercise in global and domestic statecraft, reinforcing his image as an unyielding leader. In Pakistan, General Munir capitalized on the crisis to restore the military's diminished credibility amid economic turmoil and political fragmentation. His rhetorically charged addresses, framing the conflict as a defense of Pakistan's sovereignty and Islamic identity, galvanized a divided nation. The military's rapid retaliation, missile tests, cyber operations, and effective deployment of J-10C fighters positioned Munir as a steadfast leader, filling the void left by a faltering political establishment. Pakistan's domestic landscape is marked by acute instability, driven by widespread public disillusionment with the ruling coalition. Comprising the Pakistan Muslim League Nawaz, PMLN, Pakistan People's Party, PPP, and smaller parties, the coalition, led by Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, is widely perceived as ineffective, mired in allegations of corruption and incapable of addressing the nation's pressing challenges. The government's failure to mitigate rampant inflation, a depreciating currency, and reliance on International Monetary Fund bailouts has deepened public frustration. The economic crisis, exacerbated by the 2022 floods that inflicted billions in damages, has exposed systemic deficiencies in governance, particularly in disaster management, infrastructure resilience, and economic policy formulation. The imprisonment of former Prime Minister Imran Khan, whose Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf (PTI) commands significant public support, has intensified political polarization. Khan's detention, widely viewed as politically motivated, has galvanized his base, with nationwide protests signaling a rejection of the government's legitimacy. The coalition's internal rivalries and inability to articulate a cohesive vision have rendered it incapable of addressing critical issues such as energy shortages, unemployment, and social inequality. Public discourse reflects a profound demand for transformative political reform, encompassing transparent electoral processes, strengthened judicial independence, and a significant reduction in the military's influence over civilian affairs. The government's failure to provide a compelling response to the conflict allowed the military to dominate the national narrative, with Munir's leadership overshadowing the coalition's tepid pronouncements. This leadership vacuum has entrenched the military's dominance, raising concerns about the erosion of democratic institutions. The public's aspiration for systemic reform, prioritizing accountability, economic stabilization, and inclusive governance, underscores a broader desire for a political framework that serves public welfare rather than elite interests. However, the government's entrenched power structures and the military's vested authority complicate the path to meaningful change, risking further unrest and the potential radicalization of disenfranchised communities. The absence of credible civilian leadership amplifies Pakistan's vulnerability to internal strife, positioning the military's role in the conflict as both a source of national cohesion and a catalyst for long-term democratic regression. The conflict inflicted a severe blow to India's military capabilities. Pakistan's precision strikes neutralized critical components of India's S-400 air defense system in Punjab, exposing vulnerabilities in a system designed to counter aerial and missile threats. Equally significant was the destruction of several Rafale fighter jets, multi-role aircraft central to India's air superiority, in contrast to Pakistan's retention of its J-10C fighters, which demonstrated operational efficacy. The Rafale, procured at significant expense from France, features advanced radar, long-range missiles, and electronic warfare capabilities, making its loss a critical setback. Pakistan's J-10C, a Chinese-manufactured fourth-generation plus fighter, offers comparable agility, advanced avionics, and cost-effectiveness, enabling Pakistan to maintain air parity despite India's larger air force. The ramifications of this disparity are profound. Operationally, the loss of Rafale jets diminishes India's capacity for deep strike missions and air dominance, particularly against Pakistan's J-10C, which showcased superior survivability. The J-10C's integration with Pakistan's drone and missile systems created a synergistic effect, outmaneuvering India's depleted air assets. Strategically, the Rafale losses weaken India's deterrence against Pakistan and China, as the jets were vital for countering China's J-20 stealth fighters along the line of actual control. Economically, replacing the Rafales will require billions, straining India's defense budget and diverting resources from modernization initiatives. Psychologically, the contrast between India's losses and Pakistan's J-10C success has undermined Indian morale, with public discourse framing Pakistan's air campaign as a disproportionate victory. The S-400's neutralization exacerbates these challenges, leaving India exposed to drone incursions and missile strikes. Economically, the conflict's disruptions, trade route interruptions, airspace closures, and cyber-induced financial instability have strained India's export-oriented economy, with global supply chain implications. Politically, Modi's image as an infallible leader has been eroded. Criticism of his government's strategic miscalculations, reliance on foreign systems, and alleged orchestration of false flag operations has intensified, jeopardizing the Bharatiya Janata Party's electoral prospects. For General Munir, the conflict has been a strategic triumph, particularly against the backdrop of Pakistan's domestic leadership crisis. Pakistan's cost-effective drone warfare, cyber operations, missile demonstrations, and J-10C fighters contrasted sharply with India's losses, projecting tactical acumen and resilience. Munir's elevated stature has mitigated domestic unrest, positioning him as a unifying figure and reinforcing the military's dominance over Pakistan's fragmented political landscape. His success may embolden Pakistan to adopt a more assertive posture in Kashmir and strengthen ties with China and Turkey. China emerges as a tacit beneficiary. The neutralization of India's S-400 and Rafale assets weakens a key regional rival, tilting the strategic balance in Beijing's favor. The J-10C's success enhances China's reputation as a reliable arms supplier, potentially attracting new markets. Analysts suggest Pakistan's capabilities may have benefited from Chinese technical expertise, amplifying Beijing's strategic satisfaction. China's growing influence in South Asia positions it to capitalize on India's preoccupation with Pakistan to advance its Indo-Pacific objectives. The conflict's human toll is profound, with lives lost, communities displaced, and heightened nuclear risks underscoring the recklessness of exploiting Kashmir, particularly under false flag pretenses. Economic disruptions, rerouted flights, port closures, and cyber-induced financial instability have strained both nations' economies with global repercussions. The suspension of the Indus Waters Treaty threatens long-term water security, risking humanitarian and ecological crises. The conflict's environmental impact, deforestation, chemical contamination, and carbon emissions aggravate South Asia's climate vulnerability. Globally, India's losses have strained its role in the Quad, United States, Japan, Australia, India, while Pakistan's success deepens its alignment with China, potentially alienating Western powers. Russia's challenge in replacing India's S-400 components highlights its strained position. The international community's muted response leaves South Asia to navigate this crisis unaided. Will India's pattern of launching military actions against Pakistan, often predicated on manufactured pretexts, become an entrenched feature of South Asian geopolitics? Historical precedents, such as the 2016 Uri and 2019 Pulwama attacks, suggest a cycle of provocation and response. The Pahalgam attacks' ambiguous origins fuel suspicions of a false flag, aligning with Modi's strategy to mobilize nationalist support. However, India's losses, particularly the Rafale jets compared to Pakistan's J-10C resilience, expose the risks of this approach. Pakistan's capacity to inflict disproportionate damage challenges India's military superiority, potentially deterring future escalations. Conversely, Pakistan's success may encourage indirect provocation through non-state actors. Pakistan's domestic leadership vacuum exacerbates this dynamic. The government's ineffectiveness empowers the military, which may sustain a state of tension to maintain dominance, particularly as economic hardship fuels public discontent. The public's demand for political change, including electoral reforms and reduced military influence, complicates this equation, as unaddressed grievances could destabilize the state. In India, economic pressures and reconstruction costs could prompt Modi to orchestrate further false flag operations. China's partnership with Pakistan, bolstered by the J-10C's success, may embolden this cycle. Normalizing such confrontations would deplete resources, deepen inequalities, and elevate nuclear risks. Suspicions of false flag operations could intensify proxy warfare, with Pakistan escalating support for Kashmiri militants and India retaliating in Pakistan's restive provinces. Pakistan's domestic instability, driven by the government's failures and public demand for change, risks fueling extremism as disenfranchised groups turn to radical ideologies. Globally, India's setbacks strain its Quad role, while Pakistan's alignment with China limits Western ties. Russia's dilemma underscores its strained position. Long-term, the reliance on false flag operations and nationalist rhetoric could erode democratic institutions, centralizing power in India and entrenching military rule in Pakistan. Diplomatic resolution. International mediation could restore stability, reinstating the Indus Waters Treaty and investigating the Pahalgam attacks' origins. Pakistan's government must cede space to civilian-led diplomacy, a challenge given its deficiencies. Joint environmental initiatives could foster cooperation. Prolonged stalemate and arms race. India may seek Rafale replacements, while Pakistan acquires more J-10Cs. Pakistan's domestic instability could hinder its capacity to sustain this race, increasing reliance on China. Renewed hostilities. India's economic strain and Pakistan's leadership vacuum could reignite conflict, with false flag operations as a trigger. A misstep could escalate into a broader conflict. Proxy warfare and regional instability. Intensified proxy conflicts, fueled by Pakistan's domestic unrest, could prolong instability, drawing in external actors. Global realignment and isolation. India's weakened position and Pakistan's alignment with China could isolate both nations diplomatically. Democratic erosion and extremism. Pakistan's Janta's failures and India's false flag tactics could erode democratic institutions, fueling extremism. The India-Pakistan conflict, framed as a response to terrorism, was a strategic gambit to test capabilities and enhance reputations. Suspicions of a false flag operation underscore Modi's approach. India's loss of its S-400 and Rafale jets, contrasted with Pakistan's J-10C resilience, has shifted the strategic balance, emboldening Pakistan and advantaging China. Pakistan's domestic crisis, marked by public disillusionment with the Janta's ineffective leadership and systemic failures, fuels a demand for transformative political change. The prospect of India reflexively targeting Pakistan risks normalizing a cycle of violence, exacerbated by domestic dysfunction, proxy conflicts, and global realignments. The responsibility rests with New Delhi and Islamabad to disrupt this perilous trajectory, lest they precipitate a regional catastrophe with global ramifications. If you found this analysis insightful, don't forget to subscribe for more in-depth geopolitical commentary, like to support independent research, and share to spark informed dialogue. Your engagement helps bring strategic truth to the forefront in an era of noise and narrative warfare.